things around the pot, James, and don't spare the horses.
It's showtime.
Indeed, it is showtime, and here we go. 4 around the table today. Keith Leslie is here from CH Television. Tim Hudak, a partner at Counsel Public Affairs, former leader of the Ontario PC Party. I almost said the Liberals, but anyway, sorry about that. That's the way the show's going to go. And John Wright is here. He is the new CEO at Canada Pulse Insights, launching the adventure this week. Congratulations on that, our veteran pollster.
Hear, hear.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we want to get into some of the stuff that you've been talking about, because a little bit of that is, vis-a-vis the attitudes and the pulse of Torontonians and the GTA in terms of stuff that the Ford government is doing. We will definitely talk about the Skills Development Fund and where that's going. But, of course, all eyes, ears, everything else is focused right now as we speak on the World Series coming back to Toronto. And just for the record, it's obvious and apparent now we never needed Shohei Ohtani to make it to the World Series. Just saying.
There you go.
Just saying. Right? Now, the odds are in the favor of the Dodgers. So, my son and I were at Game 7 this week, and holy cow! I have never been to a playoff baseball game, never mind a championship game like that, and it was just electric. So it'll be really interesting to see how this team performs against Ohtani and the Dodgers. But the one thing that came out, and it occurred to me as this was rolling out this week, Tim, and the cost of the tickets. My son and I were sitting way up at 500s. There was like 3 rows behind us. We were as far as you could go in the dome. But there were 4 or 5 people sitting in front of us, and all they did was complain. They were workmates, and they were talking about work almost through the entire game.
Shame.
Right? And then there must have been
take those tickets away, give them to the deserving.
Well, there must have been $1,500 worth of tickets sitting there just bitching about work. Wow. And I thought, okay, well, that's pretty expensive. Of course, the next day, tickets are going on sale. And I heard all the money, and I heard Deb was trying to get into the queue to buy tickets at Ticketmaster, and it was almost impossible to do. That was the story of the day. But then immediately the story was the resellers. And I saw some prices yesterday, $25,000 for a single ticket in the lower bowl. Now, I'm sure you were sitting in some fancy, all the drinks you can drink and food you can eat and all that stuff. But the hue and cry was obvious. Well, the premier's all over it now, saying, we got to do something about this. We got to do something about this. Well, he pulled a pin on a bill that was doing something about that earlier. So it just seems funny to me that now when we've got the Blue Jays there and the costs are up there, all of a sudden we're gouging. How does he square that circle? Because I understand that the rationale behind pulling it or bailing on it initially was we can't enforce it. So, yeah, I kind of get that, but it seems like all of a sudden now this is the hill to die on.
I'd sell for $25,000. I would. I'd turn state's evidence. I'd sell my tickets. I'd tell the girls there's always another time in 32 years. I'd sell for $25,000. I remember like it was yesterday. I remember my dad taking me to a St. Louis Cardinals game. We were on the road, a family trip to Arkansas of all places. Love it. Friends of ours had actually bought a trailer camp in Arkansas. You talk about the stereotype, and we drove down there to stay with them, and it was a wonderful trip. I think I was like 10 or 11, and we went to Busch Stadium, and there was a guy with sunglasses on, short guy. I'm going to guess probably 60s, hat pulled tightly over his eyes, and he wishes my dad says, "Hey bud, come over here." I'm looking at my dad for guidance. What do we do? And he was, I guess the proper term now is a ticket reseller. And so my dad bought home plate right behind home plate, like 8th row up. It was a glorious experience. That became my National League team. Point here, Dave, this has always existed, and I don't think you're going to stop it. I was actually in this seat as Consumer Minister in Ontario. This is an issue then. Granted, prices are higher now. Jays weren't in the World Series, but there was some big events. And my decision, you can't do anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
You could try, you could make noise, kind of like politicians will say from time to time, can't stand how gas prices go up every holiday weekend. I'm going to do something about it. And nothing really gets done. Story 2, 3 years ago, we went to London, England. Great family trip or a blowout trip after COVID. Wanted to see a Premier League soccer game. Arsenal tickets available. You were actually banned from reselling tickets in England for soccer only. Everything else is fine. Soccer, you cannot, I guess because of the hooliganism, the fights that could happen in the stands, you wear the wrong colors. And I was able to get around that and buy tickets at a marked up price. I swore to the guy I bought him from that I would say he's my best buddy. I've never met him in my life, but he's my best buddy to get around the rules. You will always find a way. And do you really want to put enforcement resources after chasing down, Keith selling his tickets to John and getting a bit of a markup and deciding where that line is? So, it'd be nice if we all got free tickets or affordable tickets. I just don't think it's government's role, or government, when they try, can't stop it.
Yeah, I guess, John, the issue is it's not just, me selling you my tickets. It's StubHub selling me Ticketmaster's tickets. I mean, there's a real industry here that's going on in terms of who's getting in to buy the tickets, and and I think that's more or less the issue. But to Tim's point, I'm not sure how you put the brakes on that.
Well, there have been investigations before, Competition Bureau. There have been lawsuits that have gone forward for Ticketmaster, and none of them have succeeded. What is not playing out in this marketplace is actually a letter that was sent, I think it was to the Senator, to the Congress by Ticketmaster yesterday, that effectively said, look, we're having some real reputational damage in the marketplace, and we're going to do some things. We're going to shut down the trading platform that scalpers actually used. Who knew that you could sell if you were a scalper to somebody else? So they're going to do that. Secondly, one of the biggest problems that everybody is dealing with clearly is when you go online, the bots are the ones that gobble up all of these things, and they're going to, in some way, shape, or form, limit that. But the proposal that they have is, I don't know how you could do it in this country. In order to register for an account for Ticketmaster, in order to ensure that they would have control over their account, Ticketmaster would want your social security number and or your tax number that you get for their tax roll. I can't see in this country, although maybe young people, entering your social insurance number in order to become, part of that new regime. So I don't know how they can control it. All I know is, Dave, the one that came closest to it is that Rush decided that it would get back into the marketplace. Now, all disclosure, I was the first one to ever write a review for Rush in the varsity at the University of Toronto. And back then it was titled Rush Hour. And I said, this band is going to make it big.
Wow.
So I've been following them since high school. And, so everybody crapped on me back then, but Hall of Fame and all that later. They put out their tickets. They are now doing 64 shows. And I was appalled at the amount of money that they were asking for. So much like the World Series, their face value averaged about $850 a ticket for Scotia Arena. And they've now got 64 shows to go. And if you averaged 15,000 people in each one of those shows, just an average, and again, an average $850, they're due to make $815 million, and that's not even including the merch. So if people are willing to spend that much money, and the resale market is ridiculous, that, there's obviously an audience there. But what was interesting to me is when I look back at the Rush tickets for the resale on Ticketmaster now and StubHub, they've all dropped to face value. And what that means to me is there were no takers for any increased premium on the tickets. And so basically, whether you're a scalper or whether you're just an individual who bought up 5 tickets, you basically are going, hey, I'm not even going to sell these. So it may not be the same for the Jays, but I think there is going to be a self-regulation in the marketplace where people say, I'm not paying $25,000 for a ticket. I'm not paying $50,000 for 2. And we'll see whether those come down, but I don't know how Ticketmaster can be regulated in this country except by reputational damage, and they have to do something on their own.
I suppose even the reputational damage is one question, but Keith, it was funny when we were at the ball game. It was clear where we were sitting, there were a lot of empty seats. Now I'm thinking, okay, it's up high, and so these, people didn't want the seats. About the halfway through the second or third inning, they started to fill up. And what I learned going out is that people just hung around and waited and waited and waited and waited, and they got the tickets they wanted for face value, like their actual value of them, or less, just so that they get somebody in the seat. So that's the other side of this. The market will do what the market will do. But at the other, Tim pointed out, this has been 32 years that the Blue Jays have been in the World Series. This is a once-in-a-lifetime thing. So
Right.
If you're going to blow the wad, why not?
Well, I suppose, but I'm still trying to stop from laughing over the whole idea of Ticketmaster worrying about reputational damage. This is just stunning. My reporting on this went back to about 2010 when I went to buy, I believe it was Killers tickets.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I was immediately, as soon as the resale went on at 10 a.m., I immediately launched to a resale site for, triple the price. And so I was upset, couldn't get tickets. So I went to 4 different Ontario government ministers directly in scrums, asking them about this. Could they deal with this? Punted around. No one wanted to deal with the consumer. Finally, Attorney General Chris Bentley came back after I'd gone to him initially and said, you know what? You're right about this. And they actually passed a bill that said the ticket resellers could not be owned by the ticket original sellers, that they shouldn't re-own the resale sites. Well, of course, that law came in about 2011. Ticketmaster continued to lobby hard against it, of course, and they got support from people like the Blue Jays who wanted to run their own resale sites because fans were turning tickets back in. So that law got overturned. Then I think it was about 2017, the Wynne government came in with, that was the McGuinty government, the Wynne government came in with a bill that capped them at 50% on the resale price. That at least gave people some sort of guideline. I agree with Tim's point, is virtually unenforceable, but it gave people, I think, consumers who are hitting the resale market at least a base and say, no, come on, you're illegally charging me too much. I know scalping in itself is not necessarily legal, but come on, at least 50% gave people some negotiating power, gave them some sort of semblance of reality, and we weren't seeing $25,000 tickets. To Dave's point about it being, a one-off, okay, it's a special time in the World Series. But for Doug Ford to come out and say that, he's all upset about this and the people are being gouged, when he killed that 2015 or 2017 law that had the resales capped at 50% at face value, why is he now all of a sudden concerned? Because he doesn't go to concerts, but he does like to go to baseball games. And again, I agree that, it's so rare. And I remember the crowds when they won the World Series. I remember being out in those crowds on the street. It was phenomenal. I mean, the feelings are just amazing. But what we're seeing here, and I think it offends me to my core, is that these $25,000 seats, that there are enough billionaires now to come in and buy these things up for them and their families. The smart people, as you said, the people you were sitting up in the 500-seat level with, we always do this at concerts and at ball games. Wait till the thing starts. And those guys standing outside with a fistful of tickets all of a sudden are willing to go to face value or even less sometimes. So that's, one way of consumers fighting back. But I think just a signal from the government, as opposed to throwing up our hands, we can't do a damn thing, especially since Ticketmaster merged with Live Aid. Now it's all one vast conglomerate monopoly, essentially. We've seen bands, try to take it on, not just Rush, Pearl Jam tried. No one could actually do anything. Everyone's throwing up their hands. There has to be some jurisdiction somewhere that says we're at least going to pass a law. Even if everyone ignores it, at least sets a base price where people can know, okay, anything over 50% above face value, you're just being a thief.
Yeah, well, and it'll be curious to see if this goes to Game 7 in Toronto. You're going to be mortgaging, selling off a couple of kids to go to that ball game. It'll be pretty wild. I want to get to the skills development fund story presently, but John, you've done some polling recently, just vis-a-vis attitudes in this part of the world in terms of the Greater Toronto area, certainly Toronto itself, in terms of the response to some of the agenda items that the Ford Nation is going to be bringing to the legislature. And they've already started doing it this week now that the legislature's back. What are you finding?
The poll was done for Rogers City News, which for their 24/7 channel, and we did it in Vancouver, Calgary, Toronto, and Edmonton. And I would look across all of those cities and find some similarities. first of all, we have to remember that when we judge what premier's popularity is nowadays, that it's not just done on the issues in the city. We have to factor in their role in terms of the trade debate. And, Captain Canada shines through here in Ontario with Doug Ford. Actually, Premier Eby in Vancouver is the most, gets the most kudos for his role as premier. But here we have Doug Ford in the city of Toronto getting roughly 50% saying he's doing a good job. Again, that sounds kind of weird from people who don't like the things that he's doing specifically at street level, but he does get that, and he gets it even higher outside in the GTA. What struck me about the issues of then the deserve to be reelected numbers for Doug Ford are sitting at 37% in the city of Toronto and higher outside of the GTA, which when he got about a quarter of the vote in Toronto is actually really good standing. On the individual issues, and I'll just kind of gloss over them, the premier's actually got good numbers on virtually every one of these, because I always say that you hold power by fractions, not by absolute numbers. Tim will know this, that because of the parties that we have in the legislature and because of the seat distribution, if you get 37%, roughly around that amount, you win a majority government. So anything over that is a great big bonus. So in the city of Toronto, when you've got a quarter of the population voting for you last time or of the vote in the last election, and you get 37 deserve to be reelected, take that to the bank. So I found that on something like the photo radar, that close, 44% of people in the city of Toronto would agree with the premier's view that it's a cash grab. So that's a fairly large constituency. If you then ask the question whether or not, they ban it, you get almost as many saying, yes, let's ban it because of that. But if you say, let's not ban it in school zones, then it goes to 2/3 of the support for the premier. So it's an interesting nuance that, the only people who have really balked at this potential ban are the people on the safety and school side of things. And if the province nuances to say, okay, well, we'll let it go in the school zones, but, ban it everywhere else, you get 2/3 in the city of Toronto and even more outside. So I think it's a matter of nuance, but I found across all four of those cities, relatively the same issues that we're dealing with here. But when it came to the premiers, they're riding higher than you normally would because of their role in the trade debate. But on the individual issues, I found Ford had a lot more support for a lot of these issues, including school trustees, where the public is 50-50 on side with the premier, 50% to do away with school trustees. I mean, again, if you got a quarter of the population giving you, the voting population giving you support in the last election, you've got 50% on side for this. I mean, you can, as I said, you can take it to the bank. It's a big number.
Yeah, Tim, I heard some folks saying, well, look at that. He's on the wrong side of this issue, or the speed cameras, or the bike lanes, or the teachers, or the trustees, rather, whatever it might be. But, again, that's if there is a binary option there. And it's not when we get down to talking about, electing a government, as John points out, 37% is really good numbers. And I think, you were saying on the radio, these are really good numbers for a conservative anywhere, never mind in Toronto.
I would have rejoiced. I would have gone to mass every morning thanking God for numbers like that. And I know, my predecessors, John Tory, Eves, or Harris, right, all would have loved to have those types of Toronto numbers. Doug Ford's success, particularly after 8 years heading to 9th year of government, is quite remarkable. All of that having been said, everybody is eventually subject to gravity. No matter what kind of high you're in the polls, gravity eventually does kick in. And what are the risks to the Ford government? Well, he has to watch out for cronyism, right? That's where the opposition is going right now. Another risk is complacency to long-serving governments that certainly impacted us last time the PCs were in office and we lost. I'm not seeing that happening. And John Wright just went through those issues where Ford, whether they're controversial, well, because they're controversial, he's picking a side. And there's enough on those sides of the issues, and you can usually knit them together along a theme, right? That keeps you active and you can resist gravity a little longer. And the third challenge is keeping the talent pool going. Now you have to bring in when members retire, they move on to the private sector, bring in new talent, move others up into key cabinet positions. So far, that seems to be functioning. A big challenge behind the scenes is making sure you have that quality when it comes to staff, both political staff and civil servants, to keep the heartbeat of a government going. So far, after 8.5 years, it's a pretty good beat.
Heath, the only wrinkle in all of this, and I appreciate the fact that we're focusing on GTA and Toronto specifically, but when we get to the example of the speed cameras, there are mayors across the province who signed a letter saying, "Hang on here," and didn't just say absolutely we must have these and do whatever we want. There is some measure of alternative approaches to it, that we should be doing this or we should tweak it this way or that way. That there is some conversation around having at least a conversation around it. I think that kind of pushes it a little bit further down the road in terms of the premier's at some point going to have to put water in his wine. He just can't absolutely say we're going to ban these entirely and never come back to the issue.
Well, their approach is a smart one. Let's talk. We're not saying we're completely right. We must have the speed cameras and all this. So let's talk. Let's figure out where they are the best suited. Because let's face it, this issue, we've seen the stats, the studies, the police, the schools. Everyone seems to be on that side of it. They've got evidence to back up how these things improve safety, whereas the premier seems to be going by feels. He understands that a lot of people are upset about getting these tickets, including a lot of government ministry cars. We're getting some of these tickets zipping through school zones too fast. So it kind of looks like, he doesn't have the evidence to back it up here. You talked about putting a little water in his wine. I think perhaps he is going to have to make some sort of deal where, especially in school zones, in particularly quiet neighborhoods, they're going to need these. I know there's speed bumps and lights and all those other things, but you can't put them in some neighborhoods. So there's going to have to be some sort of compromise, I think, but I could be wrong on this. Doug Ford is at, over 50% in the polls and on most of the issues as well, because he's got that populist feel. His gut instinct on so many issues is bang on. Even if he's only getting 50%, I mean, if half still oppose him, that's not a concern. As you say, anything over 40% is gravy at this point for a conservative in the GTA. So I think Ford knows what he's doing. He knows that it's controversial in his terms that that's why he's picking sides. He's doing that intentionally. He's not being wishy-washy about any of this. But I think on the speed cameras in particular that he might be a little vulnerable here because the statistics, the studies show that they do indeed make those school zones safer. So I think he's pushing too hard, but as I say, I could be wrong on this. He may just stick to his guns because that's what he's done in the past, and it tends to, in the long run, work out for the guy.
I'm taking bets on this one, Dave. I don't see any water in the wine. I see 2 glasses of wine. John's done the polling, so maybe he can give us a breakdown of the numbers and demographics, but I sense the Conservatives feel this issue is working for them. This is definitely Premier Ford making the call. And I did a post on this on LinkedIn along with my colleague Rob Elliott from Counsel. And what happened behind the scenes was there was kind of a deal that these would be allowed, started under the Wynne government, and Ford expanded a bit, but only within a very marginal area. The enforcement had to be at levels similar to what police do, that you wouldn't be nailing people under. And there would be, a limit. I don't think they put a number on it, but there was a belief that a limit. And the government, especially the premier, sees this as giving the keys to the liquor cabinet to the teenagers and going away for the weekend. And before you know it, in some cities, they were on practically every corner. You had municipalities like Brampton that were building centers to turn it into a bit of a mini casino to bring in money. So there was a feeling that with Premier Ford that this violated a sense of fairness for Ontarians. It was out of balance and so fast, but also that the municipalities, some, not all, and there are municipalities on the other side of this debate, that they had actually broken that early covenant. I say he sticks with the ban, and I wonder if either opposition party, when they campaign in 2029, they'll say they're going to bring them back.
3, 4.
I'd also jump in and say I did the polling on the Ray government, and when they wanted to introduce radar cameras, it was the issue, in fact, that brought one of the key issues that brought them down. People found that it was too intrusive, that it was, the socialist hoarder looking at everything. I mean, there was a context for it in those days. But the other side of this is for the common driver in the city of Toronto. I don't know about you guys, but in my lifetime here, I've received a lot of tickets in certain areas of the city going through, and it may be university at, 11 o'clock in the evening when there's no traffic there for once. and and there are photo radar on every stoplight all the way up. So, you get this massive flash when you cross over Adelaide or something like that. So, hundreds of thousands of people have actually experienced that, where they've gone 3 kilometers over or 5 kilometers over, and your car, and you get it in the mail. And it's like, so we actually do have a sentiment within the city itself that there has been a cash grab, that, you've experienced it. So I think, again, there's a constituency here for the premier, 44% in the city of Toronto agreeing with his view that this is nothing but a cash grab, and that may just be all people who have got tickets. But the nuance comes in deciding whether or not you want to take 44% or take door number 2 for 2/3 of the public, when you say, okay, well, we'll just relent and keep it in the school zones. And there are some studies there that would say that it's worthwhile to do. Tim, I don't know whether we're going to have that bet that he's all in. But I'd say, if you just said school zones are where they are and you could take 2/3, I mean, you could get it. I don't know whether he will.
Well, let's just pick up on something you just said, though, John. And the difference, though, there's 2 things. There's the speed cameras. On our street, there was one, and I got nailed. And it was in a school zone. So, I get it. But on the other hand, why is there not a short leap then to say, well, we shouldn't have red light cameras when people are, blowing through red lights? What's the difference?
Well, you're asking me?
Anybody, yeah.
Whoever hits the buzzer first.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Well, I don't know. I think I've kind of pushed the limit where, it's going yellow and you go through, and you're in the middle of the intersection. You might get nailed for a ticket, things like that. I think that people are... don't want the intrusiveness of a machine deciding whether they're in or out. They've made it almost impossible to go through and argue these things in court. I mean, you can if you want to, but a lot of people just go and pay the fine. I think the bigger issue is that this is the municipalities taking the money and having done it in such a way that you can basically, there's no wiggle room for you to get out of a ticket, and there's no wiggle room for you to get through an intersection or up a street without being nailed for 3 or 4 over the limit. So I think, again, a lot of people have experienced this, and they're against it because of that, and they see that it's creating enormous gobs of cash for the cities. The question, I think, from another point of view is, well, what happens when you remove all that money from the cities? I mean, it's a lot of money. Where does it come from to fill up those voids? And I'm not arguing for the tickets to go out to everybody on the radar, but it's going to leave a void of tens of millions of dollars in the city of Toronto in terms of some of the programs that they're already looking at. And the question is, where does that money come from?
I'll buzz in second. I'll take a shot at that. It's a good question, David. I think about this too because I feel that way, right? You put me in that demographic. So here's my 2-factor. I think it's cultural for 2 reasons. I think people generally, and again, there's a whole spectrum of folks on this, think that going through a red light is more dangerous, and therefore having the camera there it strikes them as fair and reasonable. Whereas we all speed, right? We're all typical. I mean, how often are you actually within 10 kilometers of the speed limit? I think I'm probably an average speed driver. And I think people think that, if you get pulled over by the OPP, you can say you're rushing to the hospital or you had a bad day at work or whatever. So this element of fairness, I think, when people are concerned about how often they happen, they're sort of caught out of the blue. I think it offends an element of fairness with enough Ontarians to move the premier. That's number 1 on the culture side. Number 2, the red light cameras didn't come in as some massive flock. It wasn't like some zombie attack descending upon the city. It was a sort of a slow edge, and now there are more of them. I use the analogy of the liquor cabinet earlier on. It's not like the municipalities took a sip when it came to speed cameras. They got hammered. And it wasn't all municipalities, it was some. And I think that the sudden proliferation of speed cameras across the province that was on the border of fair or unfair, I think that's what put it over the edge.
Yeah, one thing. Go ahead, Keith. Yeah,
I was just going to say this. I think the fairness issue is a big part of how the premier views these sorts of things. The red light cameras, I think, I agree. Again, most people feel that that's a more dangerous situation, and it's fair. There might be a reason you can go to court and argue, well, I was held in the intersection until the light turned, and I was in the middle, I had to keep going. there's reasonable recourse for you there. But to see the government just come out and say, we're going to ban these, it just seems a step too far. I, on the other hand, to show my prejudices here or my bias, I thought that I liked the photo radar cameras when they had. I thought it was wrong of Harris to get rid of them. I know it was popular with people, but I thought it was a good thing because it slowed people down. 120 tended to be the max on the highway at that point. Once they were gone, it was right back up to 130, 140 on a lot of the highways and expressways when you don't need to be going that fast. As say, when the photo radar vans were out, the local radio stations would tell you where they were.
Yeah,
you knew where they were. They weren't hidden. It wasn't a secret catch on you. And if you were speeding at 130 and 140, I think you should get a ticket. And these people who are claiming they got tickets at 3 and 4 kilometers over, that's not apparently what the cities were asked. They would set these cameras at 10 kilometers over. So I think that's a fair thing to have. As I say, I like the photo radar cameras that were there. I think the red light cameras need to stay, and I think the speed cameras in school zones absolutely need to stay as well.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that slowed traffic down was when the Premier took the tolls off the 407 in the east end of the highway. There's just more traffic.
It's free.
He's managed to slow it down just by eliminating the tolls out there. So it's just an interesting observation because prior to that, we used it a fair amount. But Keith, people were blowing by me, and I was doing 130. Not anymore. They're all kind of chugging along at a reasonable, 110, whatever. Okay, first questions out of the opposition this week, and not surprising, were all about the Skills Development Fund. That hit the media before even the Auditor General's report came out. And there was a lot of conversation about, the transparency, who was getting what. The Auditor General, of course, lighting the fuse under that and suggesting that the level of transparency, the process was bad, who was getting it, the allegation being that even though there were low scores for some applications, they were still being approved, and David Piccini, the Labor Minister, taking it in the neck on that, because it's his ministry that is overseeing this fund. The interesting wrinkle for me is that over the past weekend, the folks at the Trillium were reporting on Mr. Piccini's involvement in the Greenbelt scandal. The allegation has been raised by John Mutton, who was the former mayor of Clarington, referred to as Mr. X in the Greenbelt scandal. He has made allegation that it was David Piccini, prior to the last election, who gave him the heads up on the Greenbelt and the move that the before government was going to make. And this is before even the election. I had an opportunity to sit down and talk to Jessica Smith-Cross. She's the editor-in-chief at the Trillium, just to sort of walk through the details of the story, because there's a few worms in the can. So I wanted her to help us untangle them, and we'll get to that. And then I'm going to come back to you guys. I want to get your take on what she has to say.
I'll say that's definitely the allegation that's being made. People who follow your podcast, I'm sure, remember Mr. X from the developing Greenbelt scandal. When the Integrity Commissioner first released a report on former Minister Clark, and the Greenbelt scandal, there was one person he didn't name. He called this guy Mr. X because this person was under investigation for unregistered illegal lobbying. So in that report, everybody who spoke to the Integrity Commissioner, their interviews got summarized into this public report that was everything the Integrity knew about the Greenbelt issue at the time. Mr. X was not interviewed. Fast forward almost 2 years later, and this Mr. X, his name is John Mutton, he's former mayor of Clarington and a development consultant. He has been sanctioned for unregistered lobbying and banned from lobbying in Ontario for 2 years. He decided to release a podcast.
Action. Live from Murderer's Row Bar is the first Mr. X Files with me, John Mutton, Mr. X, and my co-host, Ben Fudge.
And made an accusation against Minister Piccini.
2 years ago, just prior to that provincial election, so not the last one, the one previous, I was at a fundraiser for then Minister of the Environment, Conservation and Parks, David Piccini, and we heard about it then.
saying that it was Minister Piccini who had tipped him off about the Greenbelt, that the Greenbelt would be open, and that had happened at a fundraiser that took place prior to the 2022 election. And I think your listeners will remember that the whole Greenbelt thing happened a few months, the year after the 2022 election in November, following the June election. And so what happened from there is I asked Don Mutton, Mr. X, to prove it. It's an allegation like that. You need something to back it up. And what he did was sent me an interview that he had given the Integrity Commissioner when he was investigated on the lobbying issue that had never before been made public. There are some complicated legal reasons for this. When the Integrity Commissioner investigates a lobbyist, they're not actually allowed to say they're investigating a lobbyist. That's why he was named Mr. X in the first place by the Integrity Commissioner, because the Integrity Commissioner isn't allowed to say anything about it. So that this transcript has been there for nearly 2 years. John Mutton hadn't gone public like this with this allegation until recently.
Unless you had asked the question, it sounds to me like this interview never would have come to light.
Yeah, that's what I think is kind of interesting about it. It had been there. This interview was with the Integrity Commissioner. It had been there for almost 2 years, but nobody had access to it. It was with the Integrity Commissioner, and it was with John Mutton until he decided to go public about this. Nobody knew. I think if the Integrity Commissioner had decided to interview Mutton with everybody else during the main Greenbelt investigation, at least this claim, would have been in that public report that we all digested and broke down almost a couple of years ago now.
So where does this sit right now?
So I think like what comes next with the investigations on this, because it's changed. It may come up again. I know that the opposition parties at Queen's Park would love another investigation. If the Integrity Commissioner is going to investigate this particular claim or anything to do with Minister Piccini now as Minister of Labor, it would have to come from a complaint from an MPP. The only way that the Integrity Commissioner can launch one of these detailed, thorough investigations is from a complaint from a sitting member that meets a fairly high threshold. I believe the opposition parties are quite interested in meeting that threshold, given this thing about Mr. X in the Greenbelt and given the ongoing Skills Development Fund controversy. So,
and I heard it vaguely alluded to in question period, I guess, on Monday when the Liberals were asking some questions to the Labor Minister. Are they sniffing around in terms of what you're reporting on, the opposition?
Yeah. So the couple of days since the House has been sitting again, they've been all over what we've been reporting on at the Trillium, but that's mostly focused on the Skills Development Fund reporting. So this has been, for us at the Trillium, like a long time in the works. We've been spending months on this stuff. Our first story started coming out before the AG report, all about who has gotten money, what their connections have been to the government, what kind of fundraising they've done for the government. And some reporting on, projects that have gone badly, gone bankrupt, and on and on and on. The minister went to a wedding in Paris, and the groom was a lobbyist for a company that got Skills Development Fund money, millions and millions. And the minister himself said had been ranked low when he decided to fund it. We also found out that he attended a Leafs game in those seats behind the glass with the director of that same company. Now, this was before he was Labor Minister, but it would seem to show that he has a relationship with these folks that he decided the government should give a lot of money to.
A scale of 1 to 10, where do you kind of get a sense of what the Richter scale is, I guess, on this particular file vis-a-vis the Skills Fund? Because it sounds to me like there's it's not just a drip anymore, there's a steady run here.
Constant calls for him to resign the last couple of question periods, an angry-looking premier, opposition parties having the times of their lives. That's, I guess, how I can describe what's going on.
Okay, so some thorough reporting there, and there are two stories, and I'd like to kind of deal with them separately. I just want to get your reaction. I mean, the idea that there's a Mr. X files podcast, Tim, and just the tone of the whole thing and the way it was presented. If you listen to it, there's a lot of personal issues that are going on with either John Mutton and Mr. Amato or others who are involved in the Greenbelt. And he's really kind of making up for, money lost, time lost, whatever it might be. But it sounds conspiratorial. Having said that, it's really hard not to at least address the allegations, because you pretty much have to in this case. But I found it interesting that he made the allegations to the integrity commissioner, based on that interview that Jessica found, under oath. So there's got to be something to that in terms of the level of credibility. I'll let you respond.
I don't know. So I confessed, I think, on our last episode that one of my secrets is I am a big pro wrestling fan. I loved it when I got to be Jesse the Body Ventura when the Iron Sheik intervened in favor of Mayor Rob Ford campaign. I was a minister that brought WrestleMania to the city of Toronto in 2000, into that claim to fame. So this entertains me because it looks like a wrestling podcast with a sort of muscle shirt on around a bar, shooting the breeze, what have you. So I guess you had a witness against you on the stand. From a defense point of view, Mr. X is probably the ideal to call up there. I think I'm happy to come back to it. I don't think the Greenbelt has hunted as an issue. They handled it terribly sloppily. There was a mandated, I was the critic for this legislation, review that was supposed to take place around boundaries. So I don't think there's any big secret around that, but it was awfully handled, scarred them, and now as a result, some land that probably should have come out and land that should have gone in never happened. Anyway, my main point, I do think the greatest risk to the Ford government is around cronyism, are those that are better connected, more likely to get funds, and they really need to be careful around that. And it's not like there have been corrupt governments in the past. That's not it, but there's been a loyalty that the premier has, which is an admirable tactic, an admirable characteristic. But it can get you in trouble as well. So what do I think needs to be done? Look, I think that you need to make sure that if the criteria are solid, does a minister have the capability to say, okay, the criteria is scored this way? I think that there's a higher criteria here the bureaucrats missed. You do, but it exposes you to significant risk. I would have put David Piccini in the category, if the premier does step down someday, one of the top contenders for that position. So, long run, you're taking some serious body blows here. If the criteria are different in your minds, then you pause a program, make the criteria clear, and have a very transparent method of applying for those funds. The goal here to help people transition to new jobs in a very at-risk economy, it's the right goal. But man, you got to be careful, especially after the Greenbelt. You got to be careful to have clear and transparent rules.
So are you being careful and suggesting they aren't being careful?
Whenever I think again, I don't know all of the ins and outs of this, but when it comes across that there were a set of rules, according to the auditor, and then there was a political lens put on top and some things shifted. If there's a great emphasis for police and fire, I think most Ontarians would support that. If there's a greater emphasis for training for people get into the skilled trades, I think they would accept that. But you need to reflect that in the criteria, right out of the gate. And if it's not there, then you need to adjust it. Otherwise, if I was in opposition, spend some time in opposition. I actually asked ChatGPT the other day to say what influence did Tim Hudak have on politics from his time, and ChatGPT said about accountability, holding the government feet to the fire for things like their grant programs. You got to be extra careful that it's going to pass a sniff test.
Keith, the issue is for me is that, to Tim's point, nobody's really arguing with the intention of the Skills Development Fund. I mean,
no.
Right on. Let's go ahead and do it. But they are not addressing some of the things that Tim's talking about vis-a-vis the process, the transparency around it. How did are we moving goalposts arbitrarily and so on? And at every turn now, the more media, and the Trillium has got some recent work done in terms of some of the church that have donated to the Ford campaigns, et cetera. And all of a sudden they're getting funds for some program. And again, I'm not arguing. A lot of the nonprofits and charities are doing work in a way that government can't, in terms of skills development or support and social supports. All of those things are important, but the connective tissue here is really becoming alarming.
The Trillium has done some great reporting on this. Jessica and her team have done some really good digging on this. And what we're seeing is that the minister overrode the criteria set by the civil service, set by the government itself, and awarded more than a majority, 56% of these contracts, money, cash money, from the Skills Development Fund, were awarded to applications that have been ranked low, but had lobbyists or other friends close and connected to the government. Minister Piccini himself seems deeply conflicted on this file, and yet he sounds to me like Pete Hegseth when he's questioning the legislature about his conflict. He just comes back with not answering that question, but answering his question about, his own question about how good and how important the Skills Development Fund is. To your point, Dave, that's not the question. It's obviously an important fund. It's how the funds themselves are being doled out, and it looks to be very, very conflicted for this minister in particular, because normally these criteria, once they're set, it's the civil servants who pick the winning applicants. In this case, it was the minister's office, the minister himself. He admits to overruling the civil servants in many of these cases. And some of these things, $100 million in contracts awarded to the lobbyist who has also serves as the premier's campaign manager. The ties to the Conservative Party just link back so much that it just smells to high heaven. I think it's going to cost this minister his job and perhaps some others. I know Premier Ford is standing behind him now, but his defense as well is of the Skills Development Fund. We need to get to, is there a defense for the way this minister has behaved, cozying up to lobbyists, going to Paris for their wedding, really close relationships with lobbyists that are clearly getting money from the fund that he oversees. This is just blatant conflict. The minister shouldn't be in that position. And as for him, tipping up when he was the environment minister, going back and tipping off Mr. X and some of his cronies that the Greenbelt would be open. You can get at these lands that, we won't have environmental protections anymore. Mr. X says he has witnesses. So I think that needs to be investigated as well. I mean, as you say, he swore that under oath. So both of these together look really, really bad. But the whole point of the money coming out of this Skills Development Funds, $2.5 billion going on for several years now. And most of the money is going to applicants that were not the highest qualified, were not even ranked a good quality candidate.
John, you often say when you're explaining, you're losing. And it would seem that this is the situation that the minister finds himself in right now.
Yeah, I think CTV had one of the first pieces on this, and I've never seen the reporter who did the piece. I've never seen one as aggressive on this when the minister was walking into another event that he was going to be talking about. And so, I mean, there is blood in the water on this. I'd say a couple of things on this. Number one, this is very different than the Greenbelt. And the reason is that the Greenbelt, pardon the pun, was more in the Beltway. It mattered around the city of Toronto and a couple of other places. People in other jurisdictions didn't connect with them. This, on the other hand, can be very localized. There are skills development grants that have gone to different organizations which are close to home. So that's the first thing that this has, the tentacles that go out into different communities that the other issue doesn't really touch. Number two, you're in the legislature between now and December the 16th. You have almost 2 months. And as long as the opposition parties decide that this is going to be where they're going to hammer the government every day, it distracts the message. It certainly gets the premier involved almost every day on this issue, and he starts to wear it more. Number three, how do you get out of this? Tim's right. Or Keith is right. At some point it may cost the minister his job, but if the premier doesn't do it the right way, well, then there is an admission that there is something here. And it may prompt other things. It's been mulled that there should be an investigation. And I'm not an expert in these things, but it takes one MPP to ask the integrity commissioner to look into something, and then it triggers it. Or could trigger it. And as a result of that, it may be then that the government actually then says, look, can't talk about this. It's before the integrity commissioner will make sure that it all flows through that portal, and we won't talk about it here. So it's a bit of a tricky situation for both sides of the House. But for the time being, it distracts the government from almost every other issue that it wants to deal with. It puts a reputational damage on the ethics of the government because it's going to be spread out across the province. And the Premier himself gets very close to an issue where there are some very questionable things going on, and it can be traced back to a lot of people in his own circle. So I think it's a little dicier than what we've seen on the Greenbelt.
So I would draw the distinction as well, Tim, between the Greenbelt and the Skills Development Fund. And Jessica made this point in our conversation. The Skills Development Fund is about tax dollars, taxpayer dollars. The Greenbelt was less so. It was at least, further removed in terms of the actual dollars that have been collected for the sake of taxes. So you could actually, recover in terms of the Greenbelt. What are you going to do with that money? You're going to actually have people, send it back to you? I mean, again, it gets way more complicated. And back to John's point, it hits home a little bit more because, hey, I contributed to some of that.
Yeah, I hear you. I don't know if I agree with that though, because certainly, if you were to, we saw that around, St. Mike's Hospital, wasn't it, where developers got the inside track and made lots of money off it. I think it gets people mad just as much as tax dollars if they profit illegally or even unfairly. I just think that the Greenbelt was seen by most Ontarians as a reasonable thing to think about, bad land that can be put into homes out, environmentally sensitive land in, bad process. And so canceled, right? I think that they didn't see a smoking gun there. The Skills Development Fund has so many, it's an aggressive fund. It's the right thing to do in our current economy. It is very broad-based. So therefore, there's going to be lots of targets for either the media or opposition to Hudak. I would have done that on that side of the house. My staff would be working on it all hours of the night to try to make those types of join the dot connections. What do? You don't make yourself even more vulnerable. And that's why you need to have clear and transparent rules. If the criteria are off, the bureaucrats are using, then you change the criteria and let everybody apply knowing what those criteria are. We have a registry to show, who lobbied for whom. You can track down, make sure that that's actually accurate. So I would make sure that you've got, when you're heading for the right motive, the right ends, that you've got those safeguards around you so you don't get exposed and you're giving out, I don't know how many grants a year, thousands of grants a year. You make sure that the targets that are out there have been vetted.
All right, well, let's leave it there. And when we come back, we'll see how much or more or less oxygen this whole thing has. So thanks to John Wright. He is the CEO at Canada Pulse Insights, a week on the job. Well done. And thanks for thanks for being our founding pollster. Tim Hudak is here. And Keith Leslie, Kathleen Wynne will be back in the chair next week. She is traveling today as we record, so unable to join us. And just a reminder, for those of you who are trying to find the show, we are heard on News Talk 1010 radio in Toronto, AM 800 in Windsor. Also find us on the YouTube channel. If you're watching on YouTube right now, share it. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Otherwise, on whatever app you listen to your podcasts, make sure you follow, subscribe. Leave us a comment, leave us a rating, and, if you want to have something to say about the show, by all means, let me know. You can send us a note in the comments, whatever the case may be. But it's always good to have your input and good to have you joining us for On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast.
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.